Hey everyone, I'm your host John, and thanks for joining me here in the Boneyard. This spooky Halloween season episode was made possible by all the channel members, subscribers, and viewers who have been voting in the post section this month, as we've tackled the massive question, what is the best horror franchise of each decade, counting back from the 2020s all the way back to the golden age of the slasher movie. So grab your masks, coveralls, hammers, chainsaws, or whatever be your weapon of choice, and let's dive into who we all voted the top horror icons and franchises of the past 50 years. Counting back from the 2020s, so far, we haven't had much in the way of horror icons and franchises, but what we did get I thought was pretty damned original, and so far I've really enjoyed the horror movies of this decade. In our list of choices of the biggest grossing horror icons so far, we have The Black Phone from 2021, a story directed by the great Scott Derrickson, a director whose career I've been following ever since way back when he began his career in another classic horror franchise with Hellraiser Inferno back in 2000. Based on a story written by none other than the son of horror legend Stephen King, Joe Hill, The Black Phone is pretty damn good horror. Next, we have the feature debut of Parker Finn with his tale of trauma and its devastating effects with Smile, a franchise that began in 2022. A film which I felt was a little bit derivative of that modern kinda internal horror, but certainly had its moments and a great cast. That was then followed by a franchise we've all come to adore, featuring a new Scream Queen and new horror villain in Maya Goth, playing multiple roles showing her skill as an actress through the 3 films in the series so far. And lastly, we had a new runner in the vein of Chucky and the killer doll or toy tradition with the AI-inspired Megan, which not only had some chilling visuals, but featured its own viral dancing moment that we all saw on our screens and feeds for a good few months, in the tradition of Ex Machina. Megan was spooky, but for me, it's something that we'd all seen before, done a little bit better. So let's take a look at who all of you out there in the Boneyard voted for as the best of the 2020s. We had Megan in at number 4 with just 3%. The Black Phone in at number 3 with 15%. Smile at 21%, but by far the winner, we had X with a whopping 62% of the vote. No surprise there, as Ty West is a great filmmaker, one I've watched since his early days with The Roost and House of the Devil, and I've always waited excitedly for whatever he brought out next. A director who, in my humble opinion, will earn his place in the pantheon of legends such as Carpenter, Craven, and Hooper as the years roll by. It's been a pleasure to watch his career and follow him throughout my education, because I think he is a great director who is head and shoulders above the rest in modern horror, and finally found his match, and together with Maya Goth, they created a modern horror legacy. And now we roll back to the horror legends of the 2010s, and we begin to see some throwback gory horror spectacle and more family-bound stories of terror and home invasion, and I certainly got a huge surprise with this decade and who everybody voted for. These years gave birth to the now legendary Conjuring franchise, based on the tales of 2 real-life demonologists and the now infamous Warrens. We had the beginning of Insidious that would forever have us asking what the heck is behind that red door. We also had the terrifying Purge about ultra-violence in a society turned upon itself that asked the question, who would you kill if you were allowed to get away with it for one night of the year? And in 2016, Art the Clown was given his very own movie in Terrifier, a franchise that has, in only a few years, become part of slasher and gore royalty. So, let's check out the scores. In at number 4, we had The Purge with 16%, followed by The Conjuring with 18% of the vote. In second place, we had The Red Demon of Insidious with 29% of the vote, but of course, everyone's favourite clown with a hacksaw smiled his way into the number 1 spot with 37% of the vote. Terrifier has now passed into legend as the latest little horror movie that could, in the vein of Halloween and the Blair Witch. What I love most about Terrifier is that it has inspired a whole new generation of indie filmmakers and gorehounds to give it a go. While I personally think it's a little overrated and earned its success by standing on the shoulders of giants, you can't argue that if you're a fan of gore, while the popcorn flies in the air, this franchise certainly delivers. Jumping back one more decade, we head into the green and blue tinged horror of the 2000s, a decade where Paranormal Activity flickered onto the cinema screen and blew up the found footage genre for what seemed like forever. Jigsaw chained us to the wall for the first time and asked us, "Live or die, you decide." G-horror was accepted by the whole world, which began a slew of awesome horror movies that were remade for Western audiences, which gave us the fantastic stories of Sadako and Samara. And of course, death stalked us no matter where we hid if we cheated them out of a paycheck. So let's count down our favorite of the best-selling 2000s horror franchises. In at 4, with just 12%, we have Saw. A movie born from an actor's struggle to find work that was so difficult, he just decided to write himself a movie. This franchise satisfied all gorehounds for a striking 10 movies that we never saw coming. Next, with 20%, we have Katie and Mika's battle with an unforeseen force of evil in the found footage legend Paranormal Activity. Samara slithers and crawls into the number 2 spot with 28% of the vote, but at number 1, we have Final Destination with a whopping 40%. The movie that made us check the bathroom floor for years to come. A movie worthy of the number 1 spot to say the least, but mine would have been Paranormal Activity. Watching that movie in cinemas was an experience I will never forget, as a woman was so terrified she stood up behind me and yelled at the screen, "I can't take it anymore," and ran out screaming. I do also have a great Final Destination story as well though. The night that I first saw this movie, I was on a date, and afterwards we went to a house party that was raided by the police due to noise complaints, and we had been smoking things that perhaps we shouldn't have been smoking. So as the party was raided, me and my date ran off and hid in the bath. And when we realized where we were, in our inebriated state, I will never forget the look on my date's face when they said, "There's no washing lines in here, is there?" That's why I love horror so much, as these movies have given me so many great memories. We now begin to head into horror territory that I hold the most sacred, the 1990s and beyond. There were so many great horror franchises that we could have put in here, but we had to keep it to 4. So I just want to give a quick honorable mention to Warlock and Pumpkinhead, who I would have loved to put in these final sections if I could have, but they were just a little bit behind in terms of popularity with these other cult classic franchises. The 90s gave birth to Scream, Wes Craven's heralded franchise that breathed new life into old ideas and brought them kicking and screaming into a new decade. We had Daniel Robitaille, a 19th century artist and the son of a slave who was murdered and became a vengeful spirit, and Clive Barker and Bernard Rose as beautifully sweet and monstrous Candyman. Warwick Davis began his run as a horror icon in 1993 with the awesome Leprechaun, and Andrew Divoff lent his wonderfully gravelly voice to the spirit of the Djinn and special effects legend Robert Kurtzman's spellbinding Wishmaster. So, let's see how the scores turned out. In last place, with only 3% of the vote, we have one of my all-time favorites, Wishmaster. It's difficult to see him get such a low score, but being in the company of these horror classics is stature enough. At number 3, with 5% of the vote, we have the legendary Leprechaun. Yes, it's as bad as it sounds, but it's also a horror comedy masterpiece that captured the imaginations of a whole generation of teenagers, and the Leprechaun followed us and spawned 8 sequels. You better hope that your blood doesn't run in the O'Grady family, as the Leprechaun will follow you to space, the hood and beyond if he thinks you've stolen his pot of gold. With a solid score of 43%, number 2 gives us the murderous rampage, family history and messed up friends of Woodsboro, as the many incarnations of Ghostface slashed their way onto our screens and inspired countless rip-offs and homages, enough that Scream became more than just a horror movie. It became part of horror lore and indeed carved out its very own niche in horror history. And in the number 1 spot of the 90s horror, with the biggest victory of all of our movies with almost half of the vote at 49%, we have the incredibly beautiful gothic-inspired romance and terror of Candyman. Not just a great horror movie, but a stellar part of film history. With a haunting romantic score written by the great Philip Glass, direction by Bernard Rose, and written by the one and only Clive Barker, this movie is nigh on perfect. Every role is played to perfection by the respective actors, but Virginia Madsen and the late great Tony Todd share their love, passion, and terror throughout the ages in this stone-cold classic. Candyman, in my humble opinion, is one of the greatest horror movies of all time.
I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood.
For our final section of votes, we head into the annals of horror history and discuss what is the greatest horror franchise of the golden age of the slasher. And I have to say this was the biggest surprise of all. The 1960s gave us honourable mentions such as Psycho and Peeping Tom, but 1978 gave us the immortal horror classic Halloween, the masked killer Michael Myers that stalked his babysitting victims one by one, and horror moved out of the darkness of ancient castles and remote hotels and came stalking right into your neighbourhood. The 80s brought us excess with Jason, his loving mother, and a few other surprises along the way, slashing his way through hordes of horny teenagers, and of course, Freddy Krueger stalked our dreams and taught us the true meaning of pure evil, the sins of the parents, and revenge. So let's see how the scores turned out. At number 4, with 18%, we had the residents of Camp Crystal Lake being terrorized by a murderous mother in the original and the greatest Friday the 13th. This round it was Freddy that beat Jason, and at number 3 we have the man of your dreams with A Nightmare on Elm Street. At number 2, with 28% of the vote, I actually hate to say this, especially now in the Halloween season, but it's the day's namesake itself, the original Halloween from 1978 that stalks in at number 2, leaving the number 1 spot to the slasher classic you all voted for as the best of the bunch, Leatherface, in the 1974 legendary horror classic, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that steals in with a mere 1% over Halloween with 29% of the vote. That was surely the closest vote we've ever had here in the Boneyard. So just to recap, we have X as the best of the 2020s. I'm sure Pearl would love that. Next we have Art the Clown literally ripping out our hearts for the best of the 2010s. Final Destination is the best of the 2000s, topping the neo slashes. Candyman is the best of the 1990s, and of course Chainsaw, topping off the list as the greatest horror movie of the golden age of the slasher. Just want to say a huge thank you to all channel members and subscribers who voted and made this video possible. If you did like this content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and consider becoming a member for more horror movie fun. Please leave a comment to keep this conversation going, because it's your contributions that keeps me digging up classics right here in the Boneyard. And I just want to wish everyone a spectacular Halloween, no matter what you may be doing on this ghoulish evening. All the best, and thanks for joining me here in the Boneyard. Happy Halloween, everyone.